Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the SimKit podcast for Be the Driver, getting the most of our clinical rotations. This podcast is going to be targeted toward our UME and GME listeners, our clinical year medical students, our first and second year residents, our PA, NP students. If you are in the medical education space, we're going to be talking about how to get the most from the time you're spending in the hospital in the outpatient world. So as I built this talk, I'm an analogy guy. I like to think about how we do things in analogies. I imagined you sitting in the driver's seat, your hand on the wheel, cruising down the racetrack or the interstate to the finish line, which could be graduation from medical school and entry into residency. It could be getting into attendingship, whatever your finish line might be. But the more I thought about the advice I would give in this space, the more I recognize the analogy is more like you standing on a thin and high balance beam. You are balancing and trying to avoid falling to the left or falling to the right, looking to move forward. So maybe our talk should be the balancer, a little more alliteration in there, but still we're talking about getting the most from your clinical rotations. This, of course, begs the question, what are we balancing? In my mind, there are 6 things or 3 pairs of things that we are balancing as we go through our rotations. So what are they? We are balancing humility with confidence, passion with curiosity, which we'll talk about and explain more, and work ethic with wellness. So let's start with humility. Now, I am a Tufts Medical School graduate. I remember clearly and cleanly my first and second year in med school, my preclinical years, spending so much time in the lecture hall and in the library. And right outside of our lecture hall, we had a picture and quote from Maimonides, which said, "Teach thy tongue to say, I do not know, and thou shalt progress." Now, if you are doing your clinical rotations, recognize that it is expected that you are going to have knowledge gaps. There are going to be things you simply do not know. That is why you are going through that specific rotation. So having the humility to say, or teach thy tongue to say, I do not know, that is a huge and incredibly vital step to gaining knowledge. The first step to filling a knowledge gap is to recognize it. So know that your preceptors expect you to not know things, and rather than try to hide them, skirt around them, change the subject, avoid it entirely, lean into these areas where your knowledge or your procedural skill might be lacking, and say to yourself, say to your preceptor, I do not know. After you state that, recognize, have a light bulb go off that this is a time and opportunity for a knowledge or skill set gap that can be filled, and work with yourself or with your team to fill that gap. So having the humility to recognize and admit to areas where educational growth can occur is incredibly important through 3rd year, 4th year of medical school, early years of residency, and truthfully for all of us in medicine. Now we're going to balance this humility though with confidence. As much as there is to learn in these clinical rotations, recognizably there are going to be times when you know things that other care team members might not know. This might be because of your time spent in the library or in the lecture hall, or the additional time you might be able to spend with patients or family, or simply because you have a different perspective than other care team members. Having the confidence to speak up and share that knowledge is 1, intimidating, but 2, vitally important. And I'll give an example from my own experience that I think about all the time and I relay to my learners. I was a medical student doing an away rotation in a busy urban hospital in emergency medicine. I was incredibly green, and I think I was only on my first, second, maybe third shift in this very busy emergency department when a bad trauma came in. It was a young patient who had been struck by a boat. The propeller of the boat cut multiple deep lacerations through the anterior thigh of this patient. And it was unbelievable. They were deep, deep cuts, probably through to bone in the anterior thigh. And it was like a Netter anatomy textbook picture. You could see the different muscle elements. You could see the fascia and the compartments. And an incredibly intimidating thing to see as an early learner. So I slowly took steps back toward the corner of the room. And the patient was peri-arrest or had arrested as they did the transition from the EMS stretcher onto the ED stretcher. And they began their resuscitation. And it was incredibly busy, high intensity. And I remember staring at that anterior thigh, seeing deep down into the muscle layers and recognizing I could see that because there was no blood. And I thought to myself, maybe we should put a tourniquet on that leg. It's not actively bleeding now, but it's deep and is probably source for blood loss. The team was busy. I was intimidated, and they went on and did massive transfusion protocol and active and aggressive resuscitation. And because the patient was young and otherwise pretty healthy, they were able to get that individual back. And then the leg started to bleed and bleed and bleed until much of what was put into the person ended up back on the resuscitation floor. And the patient lost pulses again. And this time they couldn't get them back. And I think about that situation frequently and recognize that even as a medical student, simply probably because of the fly on the wall perspective, I was able to see things that others might not. And if I had the confidence to speak up, there may have been a different outcome for that patient. So have the confidence, recognize that you know things, you've learned things through talking to the patient or the family, or you've seen things that others might not, and speak up related to what you see and know. How to do this? If you reference or think about the example case I just gave you, perhaps it can give you the resolve to speak up in a busy circumstance. Otherwise, though, pulling aside your preceptor, a trusted nurse, or someone, and speaking privately and individually to them is another, possibly less intimidating way to speak up in these circumstances. So as you go through your clinical rotations, develop and build that confidence to speak up about the things you know, the things you've seen, because as in that example, it can have a very meaningful impact on the patient's health, their trajectory, their morbidity, and possibly even their mortality. The next thing we want to balance is our passion. Now, you may have known or know since you were a very young child what type of provider you want to be. You may have developed that in recent years, and you have formed this passion. Lean into that. Lean into this during your clinical time, 3rd and 4th year of medical school, early residency. Find opportunities to pursue the things that excite you in medicine, whether it be electives, selectives, research opportunities, and let your preceptors know about this area of passion, and they will wholeheartedly support you in the pursuit of it. The things that excite us in medicine give us longevity in our career, make us better doctors, and know that your team of educators want you to pursue these passions and will very much support you in driving toward exposures in this area. So lean into and pursue those passions. But we have to balance that passion with a curiosity. Now, you may know that you're going to be a dermatologist, an orthopedist, a family practice doctor, a left pinky specialist, whatever it might be. And you're going to do rotations that honestly might seem like a simple box you have to check that might not have real applicability to the type of provider you're going to be. But I implore you to consider the opposite and think about this phrase. Every provider has something to teach you. Every provider has something to teach you. Not every preceptor, not every attending, every care team member can teach you something. That can be the doctors, the PAs, the nurses, the respiratory therapists, the pharmacists. They all have knowledge that they can provide you. And if you have the curiosity and the hunger for this knowledge, then you will learn things in rotations that you might thought were simply a box to check. Going further into the details of this, again, if you're going to be a left pinky specialist, your psychiatry rotation might not be one where you're gaining lots of clinical knowledge that's going to be applicable to your career. But people can teach you how to talk to and engage with staff, how to educate, counsel, or even console patients. And on the other side of the same coin, recognize that there might be things you learn about how you don't want to practice in the future. For the preceptors listening, sorry to say, people might be learning this is not how I want to conduct myself as a practitioner in the future. So you can both learn things that will serve you, that you want to emulate, but also things that you might see as a con or a negative in the way that people are providing healthcare or medicine, and learn from that about how you want to guide yourself as a future practitioner. Remember, every provider has something to teach you. And one other element related to this, in emergency medicine, we're always taught you need to know what you need to know plus one step further. So as you're going through these rotations, think about and recognize that you are not practicing medicine in a vacuum. None of us are, no matter what specialty you're going into. And knowing the patient care journey through the healthcare system and how we are part of a mesh who provides clinical care to patients is incredibly important. If you're going to be a family practitioner, you might not have a great need for inpatient psychiatry, but when you're doing that rotation, think about how knowing what the inpatient world of psychiatry is like might serve you when you have that individual with profound and scary suicidal ideation that you're referring to the emergency department for inpatient care. Knowing the other areas of medicine and how they operate will make you a better and better rounded provider in the future. So lean into what you can learn in these rotations that might not seem directly applicable to your journey in medicine. Lean into them to gather and gain what you can. And remember, every provider has something to teach you. The next thing we're balancing is work ethic. Now, in getting to where you are in your clinical career, you have worked incredibly hard to get there. You have worked hard in undergraduate, possibly post-bac, in your first and second year of medical school. For the medical students listening, you have worked very diligently to get to where you are. But speaking specifically to the medical students, third year of medical school, you are going to work as hard as you probably ever have, and probably rivaled only by some of your years in residency for your future work you're going to be doing. So this is an opportunity to grow and develop your work ethic further. In this space, I'm reminded of the fantastic book by Angela Duckworth, Grit, The Power of Passion, which we've talked about, and Perseverance. In this book, she talks about how people succeed in challenging things like Navy SEALs training and what leads to resilient, persistent, high-achieving professionals. And we, in medicine, fall into that realm, in my opinion. So think of this as a time to develop your grit, to develop your work ethic, and grow as a provider. Additionally, in this world of work ethic, I think of a quote from Steve Prefontaine, who is a high-achieving runner, who has the quote, "To give anything less than your very best is to sacrifice the gift." Now for Steve, this was running. For us, it is our intelligence. It is our mental capacity. It is the medical knowledge that we can gain and retain and hold on to. And so to give anything less than your very best in these clinical rotations is to sacrifice that gift of intelligence, to sacrifice the potential of your knowledge base. So as you go through your rotations, recognize that developing your work ethic and your grit is going to serve you not only in these rotations, but in the future, and that we have been given a gift of mental capacity and intelligence that we need to use not just for ourselves and developing ourselves as a provider, but for our patients as well. And finally, To balance work ethic, we have to talk about wellness. We have to think about wellness. These rotations and these years we're talking about in medical education are some of the harder ones you're going to experience. And it is a time to love thyself. Love yourself. Take care of yourself. As a man, again, who uses a lot of analogies and thinks in analogies, I like to think of this as a light switch. The idea of us being multitaskers, that's probably not true. Really, what we're doing is task switching. And here we need to think about and actively task switch. So when you are on your rotation, when you are working, that light switch is on. Your lights and power are shining brightly. But when you are done with the day, do not forget to turn the light switch off, to switch from learning and working and growing that work ethic to caring for yourself. If you are a runner after your day in the office or in the OR, make sure you take the time to run, to have dinner, to unwind and decompress. And then maybe you're turning the light switch back on before going to bed to read up on the cases and prepare yourself for the next day to fill those knowledge gaps that you identified during the day's work. But this extends across different areas. If you have a significant other, make sure you are maintaining that relationship, that you are spending quality time with them. If you have children, same thing. Spend time with them, be a parent, turn the light switch fully off and engage with the people you love and who love you. And this is not only going to help resuscitate you, refill you, it's going to refill the tank too, right? It's going to give you that resilience, that longevity to work hard the following day, to develop yourself, to continue to grow that work ethic. So it serves multiple purposes. It's important for our mental health, our well-being, the relationships we have outside of medicine, but it also is vital in maintaining yourself as a very hardworking member of the care team. So love yourself, care for yourself, turn that light switch off, and refill the tank. So in summary, I don't know which analogy works better for you, whether you're in the driver's seat holding the steering wheel or you're the gymnast on the balance beam looking to go forward, not falling to the right or falling to the left. But we have 6 different topic matters or areas that we need to consider and we need to balance. We need to be humble, right? Teach thy tongue to say, I know not, and thou shalt progress. It is expected that you have knowledge gaps. It is expected that there are things that you don't know, but they will remain things you don't know unless you have the humility to state aloud or inside to yourself that I don't know this. That is the first step to recognizing a knowledge gap, and then you can go on to fill it. But we are going to balance that humility with confidence. We recognize that there are things that you will know or things that you see from a different perspective that other care team members might not. And having the confidence to pull a care team member aside or speak up in a resuscitation about what you see or what you know is important and an important skill to develop. Remember that case that I presented you with. Hopefully that can give you some additional resolve to speak your mind and give the knowledge and information you have, because it can have a meaningful impact on a patient. We then want to recognize that you have or are developing a passion, something in medicine that excites you, that energizes you, and know that everyone in your circle working with you and developing you as a practitioner wants you to lean into that, to pursue it with reckless abandon, to find all of the opportunities you can to grow in that space. So pursue those electives, selectives, research, shadowing, whatever it might be to develop your passion in that space of medicine. But we're going to balance that passion with a curiosity. Remember, every provider has something to teach you. So if you're in a rotation that seems like a checkbox rotation, lean into that, realize and pursue, find and soak up the things you can learn. Recognize again that we don't practice medicine in a vacuum, that we are part of a large mesh and network of care team providers. So learning from people about how they talk to patients, how they talk to staff, how this element of medicine incorporates into the greater picture is going to make you a better provider in the future. The final two areas to balance is work ethic. We are going to be growing and developing and expanding our work ethic. We are recognizing that we want to give everything we have because it is a gift. The talent that we have, the intelligence we have, is a gift that we need to apply to its fullest. We're going to develop our grit and show ourselves just how hard we can work, just how much we can grow and learn as a provider. On the other side of that coin, though, we see wellness and recognize the need to love thyself. Remember that light switch when you're working and when you're learning is on and shining brightly, but take the time at least once a day to turn it off. Turn it off fully. Spend time with people that you love and care for you, to do the things that define you as a person. It's going to make you healthier. It's going to give you longevity. It's going to protect you against burnout, and it's going to refill the tank for the other work you have to do as you progress through your clinical career. With all that in mind, if you take and balance these 6 elements, you are going to have fantastic clinical rotations. You're going to learn more than you ever thought you could learn and grow into an amazing provider. With that, thank you for listening, and until next time.